David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. From there David went to Mizpah in Moab and said to the king of Moab, "Would you let my father and mother come and stay with you until I learn what God will do for me?" So he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David was in the stronghold. But the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not stay in the stronghold. Go into the land of Judah." So David left and went to the forest of Heron. Okay, so David's left Gath, where he made a complete idiot out of himself, and now he's living in a cave. So, again, not very kingly. But what you're going to see in these first 5 verses is David's relationship with God is coming back. You're going to see where instead of lying to people and making up his own tales and doing what he felt like should be done, you're going to see that he's going to come back, start relying on God again, and how much that's going to change his situation, and how God guides and directs his life when you let him and when you're in his service. So he's living in a cave, but things are looking up. His family found out about it, and they came to him, his father and his brothers and his mother. Now that's got to be a little comforting to have your family with you, because up until now he's been on his own and just running. So when they get there, also God's lining up a army for David. When they got there, all those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. So these men that gathered around him had an equal dislike for King Saul. They were men who had been financially ruined by the king, by him just taking their land, that type of thing, using it for himself, taking care of the people that he liked, and the heck with everybody else. So you see that relationship. Also, you see that some of these people just couldn't take living under a godless king. They were godly men, and they just could not live under Saul's terrible, ungodly leadership. So David's building an army now of 400 men that are loyal to him, and they have like problems with King Saul. They're being pursued by Saul just like David is. So these people are going to be very loyal to David because they got a lot in common, and they trust David. So his family's there. Now he's got some followers there that are willing to fight for him and that type of thing. So things are looking up. And one thing that David does, when you're reading the Samuel version of his life, you don't really know everything that's going through his mind. But in the Psalms, he lets us know what he's actually thinking about and how his relationship with God is building. So there's 2 Psalms here that directly were written in David's time of trouble. While he was living in this cave, 2 of these Psalms were written. And it shows you how his mindset was at that time. So the first one, look at Psalms 142. And this is the nice thing about David's life. You can look into his spiritual life and his just basic history at the same time. So Psalms 142, verses 1 through 3. And this is a prayer while he was in that cave, living in that cave. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out my complaint before him. Before him I tell my trouble. When my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who know my way. In the path where I walk, men have hidden a snare for me. So David's just crying out to God. I can't do this by myself. I can't get through this by myself. Basically, my spirit's faint. I've got to have your help, God. I've tried it my way, and it's not working. And then in Psalm 57, and you'll notice that the Psalms are not chronological to the events. So that's something else. If you study Psalms, you have to realize they're not chronological to the events they're representing. So Psalm 57, again, verses 1 through 3 give you an idea of what's going on. David says, have mercy on me, O God, have mercy on me, for in you my soul takes refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends his love and his faithfulness. So you can see in those two Psalms, David not only repenting for not trusting in God, he's asking God for all the help that he needs to get through this mess. And then the last one is written after the success of getting out of the cave and the events that are going to follow. And that's Psalms 138, and again, verses 1 through 3 give you an idea. I will praise you, O Lord, with all my heart. Before the gods, I will sing your praise. So in other words, he's going to let his enemies know that there's only one true God. I will bow down towards your holy temple and will praise your name. For your love and your faithfulness, for you have exalted above all things your name and your word. When I called you, you answered. When I called, you answered me. You made me bold and stout-hearted. So, if you take these three Psalms too, David goes through a process. I'm down. I'm beaten. I realize I got to rely on you. And then when God answers his prayer, he's quick to praise him and give him thanks for what he's done. So that's what makes David a man after God's own heart. We're all just terrible when it comes to our relationship with God. And we're all going to have really bad relationships with God. And we're going to all do things that we think are right and what's best for us. And we just set God on the shelf for a while. And we really don't ask him to guide us or lead us. We think we got all the answers. So that's what David started with. He realized that was a mistake. And when God helped him, he was quick to praise him because he knows who he is. So that gives you the setup of what's going on in David's mind when everything's going on. So in verse 3, David went to Mizpah in Moab and said to the king of Moab, would you let my father and mother come and stay with you until I learn, and look at this, what God will do for me. So he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David was in the stronghold. All right, why would you think David would go to the king of Moab? There's never been a really great relationship between Moab and the Israelites. In fact, look at 1 Samuel 14:47. Samuel 14:47. After Saul had assumed rule over Israel, he fought against their enemies on every side: Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment on them. So Israel, under King Saul, was at war, basically, with Moab, or the Moabites. And David was an Israelite, and he would have been fighting with Saul. Why would David go to the king of Moab And why would the king of Moab be glad to see him? Does that make any sense? There's two good reasons. The verse I just read, the king of Moab, his fight was against Saul. Now, whose fight is David against? Saul. So, in Middle Eastern tradition, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So that's one common denominator in David and the king of Moab being buddies, because they have a common enemy, and that's Saul. So that's one thing. But there's probably another thing that's even more important. What was David's relationship to the Moabites? David is part Moabite. Who was his great-great-grandmother? Turn to Ruth chapter 4. You think God can't plan ahead? Look at this. Ruth chapter 4, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Please be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth." Then Naomi took the child, this is Ruth's child, laid him in her lap and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And Ruth was a Moabite woman. So David, great-great-grandmother, was a Moabite. So he's got two things going for him. Both are enemies of Saul, and plus, David can always say, "Hey, I'm part Moabite. I'm one of y'all." So, he's got an inroad at a time when he needed protection. Look how God plans things. Back in Ruth, he said that I will have a kinsman redeemer for your nation. And who was that? Initially, it was David. Eventually, it's the person of Jesus Christ, who was born in the line of the family of David. So God's plans are never stopped. They're never changed. They may be postponed because of man's sinful intervention or man trying to change God's plans, but you're not going to change them. What he sets up, it's going to happen. He's all-powerful. And he proves it if you study the Bible, you study the Old Testament, you study the New Testament, the continuity of his word, it's infallible. And he shows that through instances like this. Who would have ever thought it would have been important that Ruth was David's great-great-grandmother? So, that's how God takes care of his own. At this point, they're safe. Verse 4 says, so he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David was in the stronghold. So they're safe there. His family's safe. David's comfortable with his family being safe, because one of the reasons he had never gone back to his family is he's afraid that Saul would do something to his family if they thought David was there. So, then the next big thing, verse 5, the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not stay in the stronghold. Go into the land of Judah." So David left and went to the forest of Herod. Okay. Enter a prophet that would be with David pretty much the rest of his life. So now David's forming a royal entourage. What does every Hebrew or Jewish king need? He needs an army of loyal people. He's got that, albeit only 400 men at this point. And they need a prophet to advise the king, and also a priest. And God's building the entourage for David's kingship. Here is his prophet. And this is the first time he's mentioned, but God has provided this prophet, and he's going to stay with David from now on. And also, he's there to guide David. And what does David do? When the prophet says, leave the stronghold and go into Judah, what did David do? He left. He wasn't doing that in the chapters before this, was he? He was going where he thought was best. And he ended up doing some of the most idiotic things that could have been done. So let's look at how Gad was involved in David's life and what he was going to do in the future. So look at 2 Chronicles. And chapter 29, verse 25. And this is talking about the prophet Gad. It says, he stationed the Levites in the temple of the Lord with cymbals, harps, and lyres in the way prescribed by David and Gad, the king's seer, and Nathan the prophet. So Nathan the prophet is going to be added to David's entourage, but Gad was still the advisor or the seer for David, and he helped David set up the orchestra in the temple. So Gad guided him in setting up the choir and the orchestra in the temple. And then look at 1 Chronicles 29:29. As for the events of King David's reign from beginning to end, they are written in the records of Samuel the seer, the records of Nathan the prophet, and the records of Gad the seer, together with the details of his reign and power and the circumstances that surrounded him. So also Gad was involved with recording the historical events of David's kingship. And also, on a negative thing, he was also there to rebuke David when he did wrong. And look at 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 11 through 25. And I'm not going to read all of that, but I'll start at verse 14. David said to Gad, well, let me start at 11. Before David got up the next morning, the word of the Lord had come to Gad the prophet, David's seer. Go and tell David, this is what the Lord said. I'm giving you 3 options. Choose one of them for me to carry out against you. So Gad went to David and said to him, shall there come from you 3 years of famine in your land, or 3 months of fleeing from your enemies while they pursue you, or 3 days of plague in your land? So Gad had to bring bad news to David. David had sinned. I'll give you the backdrop on this. David had counted the people. He'd done a census, basically, and God said, don't do a census yet. Don't count the people. David counted the people after God directly told him not to. So God told the prophet Gad, you got to take the message to David. I'm going to punish you for what you did. And the way I'm going to punish you is I'm going to hurt your kingdom. And he gave him 3 options, and he could pick the one he wanted and that type of thing. But Gad not only helped David in good times, writing his history, helping him form the choral system for the temple, he also had to bring God's judgment news to David. So that changed David's life. Having a prophet that he would listen to was very important in his life, and he does listen to it. So David left and went to the forest of Herod. So that's where God told him to go. That's what he did, and that's where we'll stop today.